friends, welcome to episode 206 of Storyteller Conclave. This is a show all about helping you run the best tabletop role-playing game that you can, whether you're a new storyteller or dungeon master learning the craft, or an experienced storyteller looking to take your game to the next level. I'm Sarah.
I'm Rob.
How we doing, Rob?
You know, I'm doing okay now. It was a very long, very stressful last couple of days. I have not gotten very good sleep. The cats have been terrible to me. But, I'm recovering. You know, I'm making it through. It's beautiful weather outside.
We've got beautiful weather outside.
It is incredible.
Here.
It's 80-something here right now.
Good old Detroit, Michigan. Things
Yes.
have finally come around to that. We've got the windows open. Beautiful, like not a cloud in the sky. Sean and I got ice cream the other day.
Yeah.
Ice cream places opened up.
I so want to go get some ice cream right now. Or custard, honestly. I want custard. Mm-hmm. But we are, and you're probably hearing a little in the background there, we are sitting here today kind of excited because we have a system spotlight, but not just a system spotlight. We have a system spotlight that literally kickstarted yesterday.
Yep.
And we have Pat Mooney on the line with us here to talk about this amazing Kickstarter, which last we checked, it was, what, 16K? That we're up to out of 25?
Yeah, 16K of the 25K goal. It just launched yesterday, so things sound like they're going really great. Pat, thank you so much for joining us.
Yes.
Thank you. Yeah, it's my pleasure to be here. I think the stars kind of aligned to get us on at just the right time.
That's perfect. So Pat is the lead designer at Flagbearer Games. They are the creator of this, what I'm going to call a 5e overlay, because we've been using that term. So it is a 5e compliant system edition that is set within the American Revolutionary War. So the setting is one of history and of fact, and yet still playable, which is kind of exciting.
Oh, it's very playable, extraordinarily playable, and we'll get into a deeper discussion of the mechanics and stuff of that. So really, some brilliant work done with the 5e framework here.
I'm glad we kind of got a glimpse at this before everything hit. You're welcome. We're hawking this up hard. It's worth it.
Absolutely.
But one of the things I think is funny, and I made this note, and I never brought it up when we had our pre-discussion with you, Pat, was that tabletop games came from like tabletop war miniatures being played, and we're coming full circle. Like we're back there. Whether it's a Revolutionary War. Didn't we do this before? Like are we 30 years out and coming back around?
Way back to chainmail. What was it? 1973. I want to say
exactly.
Was where the whole shebang got.
Yeah.
It start.
So we're right back where we started. I'm excited, and yet I'm kind of scared that we're back there.
Can you imagine younger players going okay, we're gonna play Nations and Cannons tonight. I need to go raid my grandfather's pewter figurines for some miniatures.
First off, don't do that because they're probably leaded, and unless they're painted, you're gonna have problems.
They're also probably priceless. So yeah.
That's true. That's true. That is very true. So yeah, we're very excited. I want to get this out front because I really want you to be able to talk about this opening. So tell us a little bit about Flagbearer Games and this educational mission that you're on with this, where it sits. It is a game, and yet it's an educational mission. So
I think that's a great place to start, right? So we at Flagbearer Games are going to tell stories that are lifted directly from history, and so the work that we're doing right now with the Revolutionary War is really, it's only one part of a larger initiative that really want to do to create mechanics and scenarios and, all types of different gameplay, material to play games set during the age of revolutions. The American Revolution is the one that we're kind of putting to the fore right now. It's the iconic one. It's the one that that we're all very well familiar with, right?
Yeah.
But it was the start of a chain. You think about the term domino effect, right? Mm-hmm. The American Revolution started what was called the Atlantic Revolutions, which then reverberated throughout Europe and Latin America, most notably, of course, in the bloody chaos that was the French Revolution. But you had, scores of other attempted revolutions, some of them failing, some of them succeeding, but all of them, having these very powerful, poignant moments of resistance to, evil empires and colonial rule and people rising up to fight for their freedom and fight for self-determination in ways that had not been thought possible before. And that's something that we think is really cool, both, from a historical perspective, but also it leads to really interesting gameplay, great role play moments, and moments where we can dig into, iconic, well understood periods like the Revolutionary War, but also lesser known moments that happen all over the globe in support of these types of heroic resistances.
Oh, sure, absolutely. And I mean, even within just the scope of the Revolutionary War, you were telling us a little bit before the show that there are all sorts of little vignettes in history of smaller, political changes, things that happened between various Native American tribes and such like that, alliances between nations and whatnot that, we all know the story of, the Redcoats are coming and stuff like that. But it's so much more happened during the Revolutionary War. And there's a lot of those stories end up in your book here, but, a lot of them you didn't have the room for.
That's why we made another book.
Yeah, and that's the thing that I wanted to say with this is that it feels like this is just like, it's not even the foot in the door. You're kind of kicking the door open, and hopefully, and I hope that you get other educators not just from America here, but from around the globe to be able to step in and help with Flagbearer's mission, because I would love to see other revolutions done the same way as this. Because for me, this is exciting. This is how I would want to learn a little bit more about history. And just from both Sarah and I's history of playing games, there's an inherent difference in the way you learn and the way you're remembering. Because role-playing is an experience that forces you to imagine. It forces
100%.
you to imprint those things in your mind. And so now, as you're playing, you are in that time period in your own head, and that is imprinting it in a different way.
So what we've done here, right, we've created a setting and scenarios that put you, sort of through the eyes of a Continental Army soldier, envisioning that world. And so, we can give you a musket and let you blow some redcoats away. Whenever I play with kids, of course, they're bloody little monsters, right? They love to just rain down hellfire on those poor Brits. But the thing that's more important is what I call like embedded civics, right? Okay, so you've got your marching orders, and you've got this enemy force, and like rah go patriotism, right? But at the same time, well, you're at Valley Forge, and nobody has any boots. The whole camp is starving, and smallpox is epidemic, right? What do you do? How do you feel in that scenario? How does your character deal with these hardships, with these hardships that are kind of intangible if you read a history book, because you are thinking of things from a top-down 250 year in the past. We know the end to the story. We know how this all works out. And at that time, the biggest myth about the American Revolution was that George Washington rode across the Delaware, and then kicked the British out of Yorktown, and boom, wham bam, it's done, and we got a country out of it. And it was an incredibly dire, high stakes situation where you had all sorts of different groups, the Army, the Continental Congress, the constituent states feuding with each other for resources, doing their best to scrounge things up, making alliances and deals with France and Spain to smuggle gunpowder in just so they could be able to field an army, extending benefits and making promises that, quite frankly, they couldn't cash, with soldiers' pay to get people to sign up, because, the real during the most desperate moments of the war, there was a chance that the Continental Army would itself entirely collapse, and there would be no one left to fight if they didn't have any big victories. And so that's really, the when we talk about our educational mission, what we want is to create a role-playing environment that supports that teaches you from a boots on the ground perspective. But we especially want to do that with schools and libraries and historic organizations. So we have a program that we started at the beginning of this year where any educator can go on our website, nasonsandcannons.com, and request a copy of our core rules, and we will send it out to you free of charge, right? All the material that you need to play the game, like pre-generated characters, quick play guides and stuff like that. It's all there on our website. And we really want this to be something that you can use, for your D&D club. If you're a teacher, if you know a teacher listening to this, right?
Yep. Mm-hmm.
Anybody who might be up this alley, if you think it's a great way to get kids, just to peek through the crack of history, right? Mm-hmm. And once you get somebody who has just thought about, oh, well, why is it that the Continental Army was arranged this way and had all these people in different places, and they were really struggling to field that many troops? And the moment that you get a student to ask a single question and, go online and type something into the search bar, right, then you've got them. Then you've got a history major in the making, and that is my mission. That is what I really want to do, is to get as much of that, as much curiosity, and to nourish that as much as I can through this game.
Oh yeah, absolutely. I mean, harnessing the power of not only their imagination but their curiosity, and a role-playing situation kind of puts you in the middle of all of this. It's one thing when it's, a stuffy history book that you just read about, a bunch of dead people, but it's another thing when it's the lore of your campaign.
And that's one of the points that I was just thinking is, like, as a storyteller, like, even as a youth storyteller, like, one of my things that I would always be looking for maps, I'd be looking for history, I'd be trying to pull up lore of the thing. Right. So I would do a ton of research, and this is historical research. Like, this could create a book report at the same time.
Yeah, exactly.
But you're interested. You want to be involved with those things and be able to make it as real as possible. Mm-hmm. And verisimilitude is something that we love to bring around, and that you can't get closer than this because you have the information right there.
Yeah, absolutely.
And if I can soapbox on that for 1 second,
go for
right?
it.
I mean, it's embedded. It's in our DNA. It's like, what we are passionate about. Like, I'm just a big old history nerd, right? And so I love to make this stuff. We did a print run of a bunch of cloth maps. These maps are all, scanned from primary source documents that are 250 years old, upsampled, sort of painstakingly restored, printed out on cloth. That we thought, well, maybe these will sell. I mean, honestly, I just kind of wanted to make them so I could have some for myself, right? They're really cool if you're running a campaign and you want to be able to put, like, the city of New York in front of you, and you let your players run wild.
Oh yeah.
Or to track your progress sort of up and down the Eastern Seaboard. So we first sourced these documents to create, like, an atlas, and to build, like, a couple of chapters were called gazettes, talking about different interesting places in the world, in the North America at the time. And it's translated to, now that the Kickstarter is up, right? It's some of our biggest sellers are people that just really like those maps and think they're really cool. So hey, if you're looking for a gift for your uncle who's really interested in the subject matter, or I will drop the link that we're using, that we were very lucky to pick up.
It is amazing.
Drum roll, please. yourdadwilllovethis.com.
I love that. I absolutely love that link. Oh my gosh. So I'm going to shift this ahead just a little bit because I have to get this question in.
Uh-huh.
Why D&D? Was it,
yeah,
especially with the question. OGL stuff going on? Like, was it, like, obviously your development stepped well before the OGL. This has been going on for years. How long is this development going on, and why D&D?
So it's been ongoing for quite a while, right? This is we've been working on this project for over 4 years, and on this book, the American Crisis, the source book on the American Revolution in particular, for about 3 years now. The secret sauce at the heart of this project, was realizing, number one, okay, Alexander Hamilton definitely knew the cantrip Vicious Mockery.
Yep, definitely.
And number two, that flintlock firearms kind of slot into the action economy of D&D combat in a really interesting way, right? And once I kind of had that eureka moment, I was like, oh, kind of off to the races. The most important reason is again, it goes back to our educational mission of, we want this in schools, and it's difficult under the best of times, to get facilitators to run D&D clubs. Even if you are the most game curious teacher out there who loves to crack open story games and run, pours through all these different products, the major, the big kid on the block is D&D. It's always going to be D&D. And so the one that we have the largest chance of actually getting in front of people and being used in those types of educational environments was D&D. Now that doesn't mean that we have a kind of a half-baked product on our hands here, right? Like this is also coming from me as a game designer and as a D&D player, having thought about this quite a bit and figured, okay, so if this is the framework that I want to use, right? How can I take some of the familiar tropes in D&D and twist them, right? Mm-hmm. How can I have that heroic fantasy with a power level that increases over time, right? Mm-hmm. And still have it make sense in a historical environment. And kind of the realization there was, like in any game of D&D, you're not commoners, you're not your average Joes, right? You are a bit larger than life figures, right? You're sort of equivalent by the time you've been going for a while to folk heroes, mm-hmm. like Daniel Boone or Molly Pitcher. And the idea being really to focus on, the types of high stakes drama and moments in history that could have tipped the scales, right? Like things like espionage or guerrilla actions, operating behind enemy lines to secure a certain objective or to gather, a report on, the disposition of enemy forces, like all the type of stuff where players as a group of partisans and, sort of special light infantry soldiers and rangers, both of the class and otherwise, could have a really large impact without the game getting bogged down in giant battles, which D&D is not good at, right? So we're talking right. the skirmish level is really where they're thinking. It's really where Nascents and Cannons shines.
Now, we said, this has been in development for a long time here, but obviously recently we had the sort of OGL 2.0 shake-up with things. I'm sure that caused quite a stir with you guys over there at Flagbearer. How did you deal with the OGL scandal and in the deepest, darkest times there where it looked like D&D might be having a very rough time there? Did you consider other game systems for it? And if so, what were they?
There were a lot of sleepless nights, right? Just because this project had been in development for 3+ years. We'd put a lot of blood, sweat, and tears into it by that point. And we were, we just launched our Kickstarter yesterday. That's like T-4 months, relative
right.
to 3 years worth of work. We were pretty deeply invested in what we'd already put together at that point in time. I was on the front lines of that fight. I did my best, as soon as that news was announced, to really try to spread awareness, to help people understand, this sort of alphabet soup of acronyms that were floating around, like why this is important and mm-hmm. meaningful, mm-hmm. And to get folks to voice their displeasure. And ultimately, I think the issue, it's simmering down. I can't say definitively, in what way it ultimately is going to settle, because the one outstanding question in the long term is going to be what the OGL is going to look like when the 1D&D, mm-hmm. The new version, 5.5, whatever it is you want to call it, like, will that be egregious again? Right. That's an unsolved question that I don't have the answer to right now. Mm-hmm. But for the moment, it looks like that backlash was incredibly important in getting a culture shift. And I'll take that one step further, right? Because, and this kind of goes along with our message and like what Nations and Cannons is as a hybrid project, right? One of the things that I was really trying to raise awareness of, and I was actually interviewed in an article by IGN, like, just a couple of days after the news broke, among several others. I don't want to take all the credit here, but
Right.
I talked at length about what I thought was the importance of open standards. So Nations of Cannons is a 5e. Overlay, I think, is a really elegant word. I've been using the term hack. But it's an adaptation of an existing rule set because it's a hybrid. It's trying to do something in a gameplay space where building a dedicated game, an indie story RPG, whatever it is, about the American Revolution is a huge risk. Like if that was the value proposition just in and of itself, right? I don't know if it would get enough eyes on it. Just speaking frankly and honestly, right? That it would be able to succeed.
Sure.
In addition to all the wanting to be compatible with like as many schools and teachers that are going to be able to run the game. Nations of Cannons is not the first game to have done this, right? If you look back at the 23-year history of the OGL, you had things like D20 Modern, like the original Savage Worlds, like the Star Wars D20 systems, which were all effectively running on the D20 engine. Just recently, our friends over at Evil Genius Games rebooted D20 Modern in Everyday Heroes. And they had a pretty successful showing on Kickstarter, right? Which shows that there is a stomach for people using the D20 system, which is not just 5e, it's just those rules, to simulate other types of gameplay. And, not every game is going to be a good fit. Not every setting is going to be a good fit for a D20 system. But having an open standard is incredibly important, not just for us, for our bottom line, but as a design practice, as a resource that's available for indie devs out there. And I tell this to my students, because I also teach game design at the university level, right? A lot of game designers get, kind of cut their teeth in the digital world, in the modding scene, right? In taking existing games and modifying them and finding cool ways to insert like new logic, give a new coat of paint or teach an old dog new tricks, right? Because it's so much easier than building something for yourself, right? And so there is a level of risk that you can take with a weird off-the-wall hybrid project like, the Revolutionary War in D&D, that you might not otherwise be able to do if you did it as a standalone project all on its own. Yeah,
absolutely. Now the setting here, we mentioned earlier that there's a lot of like little bits of rich history, like you said. It wasn't just George Washington kicked them out and then we had a nation.
It's not like the coastline was only like 200 miles long either. We're dealing with the entire eastern seaboard plus.
Yeah, exactly. So there's so many little bits of story in here, so many great little actual historical characters that you have highlighted in sidebars or used it as examples of archetypes of characters. Or even laced into the adventures that are in the back of the book. Can you talk a little bit about not only kind of how you came by all this vast history to put in there, but also what sort of process went into making sure that this was a very multicultural story that we were telling? You've got great stories in there about various Native American tribes and such like that. Can you talk to us a little bit about that?
Yeah, I think it's a great question. And there is kind of this conception of the American Revolution as a stuffy old white man's war.
Right.
And while, to a certain extent, the landed, wealthy class of white elites was the one real beneficiary of the war at the end. Like, when that power structure kind of ossified into, the entity that became the United States today, at the time, there really was, as there always is in moments of revolution, right? People who believed in the words "all men are created equal," who believed in a fight for equality. That's what makes these moments so interesting, is because when you've got a rebellion and when all bets are off, then you kind of don't know what kind of society is going to come out with. And so, one of our really major goals with this project is to shine a spotlight on underprivileged voices, right? On people who are in the historical record, but aren't given a lot of weight or resonance in the history books today. We have a number of iconic characters that we've created, and these are available in our adventure campaign as free generated characters. You can go on our website and download the character sheets, and those characters are, there are certainly some white guys, right? But we're very proud of the fact that over half of them are women, are Black Americans, are indigenous, people, and they each one of them is someone who fought for the patriot cause, and is a real documented person in history books. You can go online, and next to the character sheet on our website where you can download them is a link to their Wikipedia page. They're people that were there. They had agency in the past, and they fought for what they believed in.
Yeah, absolutely.
Oh, go ahead. Yeah.
Oh, I was going to say too. You'd also mentioned too that part of your part of the mission kind of Flagbearer Games was to also make sure that the people behind the scenes had a multicultural, very diverse set of voices, so that it wasn't just a bunch of old white history nerds. I
don't know if I'd call myself old. Like approaching middle age, I suppose, but. Yeah, I'm outside of the 20 to 35 bracket now, so that stings a little bit. But
fair enough.
No. We absolutely, to a certain extent, like as a white dude, right? There are some stories that I just can't tell, and that's not me, like muzzling myself from an editorial perspective. That's just I would not feel comfortable, telling someone else's history. That there are moments in time that are incredibly important out in the frontier, in places like the Caribbean, and the history of the Caribbean and its links to the chattel slavery system, is integral to any understanding of the American Revolution and that time period that followed. And there are all sorts of these moments that we want to be able to tell those stories, but I want to partner with people who feel comfortable representing their own peoples, representing their own cultures, bringing that stuff to the table so that they can tell their stories. I'm not the one who is, guiding the process, who's orienting anything behind the scenes. I can come up with mechanics. I can come up with, scenarios, right? But ultimately, sure. We want to give folks the opportunity to crack open, those corners of history and really shine a spotlight on moments of heroic resistance, specifically heroic resistance to colonialism. That is really embedded at the heart of Nations and Cannons.
Yeah, absolutely. Do you want to get into the mechanics a little bit? Because you've done a lot of really unique things to kind of, like you said, hack this to use D&D's framework, 5th edition's framework.
I mean, for a very
really interesting
tactical game, it feels like you really, like you were saying with firearms and some of the pieces, it fit very good with the timing. But one of the things that hit my mind, and I know Sarah we were both talking about this, is like right in the beginning, you describe what levels this is good for. And you set this kind of bar of retirement early, this protege system. Where did that come into your mind frame as you were developing this?
Yeah, it's a really good point. Our firearm rules, effectively the way that firearms are balanced is that a single shot flintlock musket deals about twice as much damage as other ranged options, but it has to be reloaded after you fire it as an action. And then actually, you can reload it as an action or as an attack. That logic was kind of originally meant to be compatible with the gunslinger from Critical Role, which is kind of like one of the most popular and well understood iterations of black powder mechanics in 5e D&D. Now that mechanic, that class has a bunch of mechanical issues and concerns that I think are pretty well noted, and we took that as a starting point. But ultimately, the idea being, how many attacks around can you make? How much can you jam a bullet, a musket ball down a musket, fire, and do it again in 6 seconds in a way that makes any type of consistent sense?
Right.
The realization we came with was that after 10th level, the game starts to fall away, right? You get to the point where enemies really become bullet sponges, well beyond any reasonable human being would be able to absorb, and still kind of like keep it to that level of verisimilitude. A lot of class features start to become super heroic, even for martial classes at that point in time. And spell effects, you kind of get off the rails, and we'll talk about gambits and how we handle that stuff later on. But that decision was made to have historical games play with nations and cannons to occur in the bracket from level 1 to level 10. And then after you reach level 10, when you get to the point where your character would kind of become superhuman, you retire that character. And then they become the protege, or sorry, they become effectively promoted to high command in some respects. You create a new character as their protege who can kind of inherit some of their goodies and has a leg up on the system, which allows you to then still have an impact on the story and role play moments, both at the high levels of power, from your retired character who's now acting as a commander, and your new character who's the replacement, boots on the ground, actually going out and going on these missions and special operations. It's a system that we want to expand on in the future. We have a kind of a baseline rule in there right now, but I think it's a good one. It allows players not to feel like they have to, throw away their character when they hit max level, and then not be able to continue to explore and experience the world. It's a way to have your cake and eat it too, in some respects.
Oh, sure, absolutely. And I think Dungeon World also had a very similar mechanic there. I think it was.
That's where we borrowed it from.
Yep. Okay, I was going to say.
Credit is due.
I think it was actually 10th level in Dungeon World as well. So
that's fantastic.
Yeah, absolutely.
I mean, good borrowing.
Now, you mentioned gambits a little bit earlier. I would really love for you to elaborate a little bit on gambits and how you kind of adapted the magic system over. But what I also really kind of want you to dovetail into here is that you've introduced a new class into the game called the Firebrand, which is kind of, as I understand it, a bit of a mix of bard and cleric that covers these great orators. And the people who would write these missives and newsletters and whatnot to get these words out, where we're talking, very, very, very pre-internet days here. So,
they did have the power of the press.
Yeah, but you did have the power of the
old
press.
school printing press.
Exactly. And so you've kind of crafted this Firebrand class around that as a social influencer of a mover and shaker, either a man of faith or like I said, a great orator who can shift the tides of crowds either for weal or for woe and whatnot. And they primarily make use of the gambit system, which is kind of your replacement for magic. So can you tell us a little bit more about that?
Yeah. So the classes that we support in a historical Nations and Cannons game are fighter, ranger, rogue, barbarian, and then of course the Firebrand. And we have a number of new subclasses and weapon systems that we really want you to within that somewhat limited pool of available classes still have some player expression. So we really want you to be able to spec into different builds of, if this one character is a sharpshooting rifleman, and another character, that prefers to do a bayonet charge, right? Well, you've kind of feats and other things that they can do to facilitate that. So that there is still kind of a good mix and diversity within the play group. But, if you notice that group of classes, the Ranger gets some casting, which I'll talk about in just a second. But there's no bard, there's no face, right? All the charisma classes are completely shot, and so we decided to create another what's traditionally called a half caster, right? Called the Firebrand, which is like you said, your rabble rouser type. And to give them lots of abilities to influence the world around them, to charm enemies, to give inspirational speeches and rally their allies. And that's through a system called Gambits. And Gambits, this is, it's similar to how the Artificer class in 5e is kind of encouraged to flavor their spells in a different way. Like, you're a craftsman. How do you achieve that effect? Come up with a cool way to describe that. And,
it's not a scorching ray. It's a laser cannon. It's
yeah, exactly, right.
Right.
Gambits are things like, they function mechanically identically to spells, but we encourage you to flavor them as like feats of gumption or daring do, tricks, or actions of espionage, humoral medicine, right? And some of the weird like bloodletting and surgical techniques of the time, right? There's lots of ways that we've found ways to incorporate elements of the colonial world and that point in time specifically into these extraordinary abilities, which are then, using slots to cast just as any other caster might. And so my favorite, Firebrands have a number of different subclasses that they can choose. The Firebrand was an attempt to kind of bring a caster class back into a world with entirely half casters, because they have a resource called I'm actually blanking on the name of the resource right now. They have a resource
It's fine.
that they can expend to in a limited way to upcast spells or gambits even beyond what they normally would be able to. So you can do that. You can kind of have access to abilities that a wizard or a bard of an equivalent level might, but we've curated those so they all make sense in a mundane world, right? The big problem with wizards in the 18th century is they can snap their fingers and then point at something, 150 feet away, and it explodes in a fireball. Well, you can do that in Nations and Cannons, but it involves, creating a fougasse, which is a pit in the ground that you dig over the course of an hour, you fill with gunpowder and a bunch of debris, and then, when the time comes, you light it, and it explodes, and it rains down hellfire on the specific point that it's targeted at. But in order to do that, you have to have the time to create it in the first place. It has a very fixed location that it's targeted at, so you have to kind of lure your opponents into that, dead zone. It really encourages you to think a bit more tactically about how to use these powerful abilities, and to kind of use the terrain and the environment of the campaign world to your advantage. There's another one that I'll get into. This is my personal favorite. The Firebrand gets an ability, I think it's 6th level, called Pamphleteer. And that ability allows them to weaponize the Postal Service by writing a sternly worded letter and inscribing one of their gambits into it. So charm person, or suggestion, I think is a better example than charm person. Or something, we have a new ability called Code Dwello, which is, I challenge you to a courtly duel, sir, right?
Yeah.
Or, other similar effects that you put in the mail and that take effect when the target receives your letter and opens it.
I
They have to make a
can't
saving
tell
throw.
you how much I loved that ability when I read it.
Like, I feel like that needs to be in D&D. Like, you just send a letter to somebody, they open it, and the magical glyph stares at them, and they just go, oh, crap.
You said a telegram. Screw you. Strong letter to follow.
But it's so brilliantly accurate. There were
Yeah.
so many times in history where strongly worded letters literally were presented to people, and it changed what they were going to do next.
Well, sure, absolutely.
You know what? And it wasn't even so much that, like, it was just that brief moment of gentlemanliness breaks away, and they're just like, we're marching on this city, but sir, there's no one there. There is someone there that we're going to take care of, and it's a trap. It clearly is, but it was enough to break that person's mind away from how they should be doing things. And that there is command. That's you're literally taunting. And that's beauty in combining that, and that's wonderful. It's easy to imagine.
I'll take that one step further and talk about the Ranger gambits a little bit, right? So we've got, things like a lower level gambit called Fog of War, which is that you it's almost like a swift invisibility type. You fade into the backdrop as long as you're concealed into the environment around you to be able to, get a moment of relief or instantly, hide yourself even if you're not a rogue. We've got, other ones, one called Order Volley, which is, you recruit a bunch of Minutemen or militia folks. You get them all ready, and then at the time of your choosing, you order them, and then kind of like from the shadows, they all shoot a volley at your enemies and then disappear. And my favorite, which is, it's similar to, your sternly worded letter changing the tide of history, but it's in a very different way. It's a high-level gambit called Ruse de Guerre. And some of our gambits are taken from kind of like French or Latin phrases that I think give it kind of like a more of a mystical feel, like the equivalent to your Bigsby's grasping hand is actually, just a Frenchman. But Ruse de Guerre is, you get a bunch of your buddies together and you do things like it's nighttime and you light a bunch of campfires, and you do that, in a kind of a large perimeter, you run around, kind of like making noise and things like that, so as to seem as a much larger force than you actually are. You create a shadow army.
Sun Tzu, if you are strong, appear weak. If you are many, appear few. If you are, yep. All warfare is based upon deception.
Yep.
And by doing that, that's a narrative moment right there. Like that's not a combat gambit, but like what it does, it allows you to kind of project force and trick, whoever the opposing commander is. This is something that happened, right? Yeah. Historically, there were moments, Washington, wasn't actually a very good battlefield commander. I mean, he wasn't terrible, right? But his real strength was in logistics and actually knowing when to fight and when to turn tail. Washington was brilliant at retreating and at holding his army together at all costs when otherwise, the odds were stacked against him. You can see this, in a couple places, most importantly in his retreat from New York, when the British land the 32,000 troops in New York Harbor, right? Washington is completely outmanned, outgunned, caught off guard, stuck, in Brooklyn, and he needs to get his guys out of there. And he's just happens to be lucky enough that it's on a moonless night with some heavy,
fog
weather, fog and clouds. And so he does not lose a single man in this operation. The British are completely caught off guard. He has a bunch of his guys go create these fake campfires and pretend like everything's hunky-dory. The British wake up the following morning and find that he has vanished into the wind, leaving nothing. And that is how, the Continental Army lives to fight another day, is by using Ruse de Guerre. So George Washington is a high-level firebrand.
Well, it's better than the alternative. You're stuck in Brooklyn, you see 32,000 redcoats rolling up on you. You just don't stand there and go, "Hey, I'm marching here."
I was what that reminded me of was another Ruse de Guerre that, and I can't remember the battle it's from, but the ships were too far at sea. They couldn't actually bombard. And so he ordered the general head who was on land had ordered two of his men to row out and tell them to not load cannonballs but to fire them. And he planted charges around the field and had people light them so it would seem like they could, and it turned the battle because the other guy wasn't going to charge into cannons.
They were just hearing cannon fire, seeing
then
explosions, put the two together in their own minds and went, they've got artillery, we can't be here.
We can't run the beach.
I gotta look that one up. This one's news to me. That's fantastic.
I don't remember if it was
thing that we love.
if it was Revolutionary or Civil War, but I remember this story and I was just like, it was a brilliant tactic because they couldn't get the ships too close to shore and they would never been able to target that. And it was just a simple ruse, and it was a quick, swift change.
Yeah,
it's beautiful.
And so a lot of our gambits are things like that, where okay, well, if you're playing a historical Nations and Cannons game, you don't have spells, you don't have anything supernatural, right? You're in history, but we use things like black powder, and the kind of force multiplier that are large explosions to allow you to achieve, with preparation and planning, those type of effects which are analogous to casting spells in your typical D&D
Well,
game.
one of your barbarian subclass that you've included in here is the Grenadier.
Yeah.
And actually gets a few gambits of his own, a quote-unquote spell-casting barbarian. You've got making IEDs and such like that, and being able to lob them into battle is pretty scary. But it was really great to see a cool barbarian subclass like that, using all that black powder tag.
That one I like quite a bit. This one, it's deceptively simple, but it's got a lot of thought that went into it.
Yeah.
The way that grenades work in this time period, they're very unpredictable. A grenade is really, if you think of like a pirate cartoon, right? It's a big hunk of iron filled with gunpowder with a fuse on it, right? It is a crude weapon. And so they were often mostly used in naval ship-to-ship combat. But if you were holding one of those things and you cut the fuse too short, it would go off in your hands to disastrous consequences. And so, we have a mechanic where if you roll a misfire, and misfire is a mechanic that you can misfire a gun and the gun jams. It's a way that we balance firearms. If you roll a misfire on a grenade, it blows up in your hand, and it hurts not only you, but the people standing around you. But barbarians, grenadiers specifically, gain the ability to use reckless attack with when throwing a grenade. So they get out there, they expose themselves to battle. They're so angry and so reckless that they're actually doing the thing that's going to keep the party more alive, because they've got advantage on that attack. They have a much lower chance of actually rolling a misfire. So it's one of those cool places where we, even a class like Barbarian, which is generally speaking like such a melee-oriented class, we've found cool ways to inject some of those black powder systems into them and make it feel fresh and unique.
Now, speaking of black powder, did you want to elaborate a little bit on the firearms rules? I know you mentioned kind of about the action economy earlier, but I know there's a lot of different types of black powder weapons you've included.
Yes. All right. Let's get into it. This is my favorite part, right? Okay. The number one criticism of most black powder systems is that, if guns have a misfire chance, it unduly penalizes characters with extra attack.
Sure.
Like your fighters and barbarians and whatnot. Because the more attacks you make, the greater chance that the thing, ceases functioning, and then it kind of sucks.
Right.
So what we have done is we've created a system called War Gear. And War Gear it allows you to customize your character's loadout. So you can go into battle with a brace of pistols strapped across your chest, like Blackbeard, and just dual wield with as many pistols on your person as you could possibly cram in there. You could be, a sharpshooter who carries a musket or a carbine for short range engagements, and a long rifle for long ones, and maybe a knife stuck into their boot that they can use in a pinch if they fire both of their firearms and don't want to be left undefended. So it gives you the ability to carry sidearms, which are incredibly important, to realistically use mechanics like misfires, which absolutely happened across the battlefield. An incredibly important thing, an important balancing factor. If firearms do an enormous amount of damage, then we have to have other ways to make sure that if you're using more traditional D&D combat, that it doesn't just completely negate encounters.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah.
And, like I said before, this allows you to, even if you're a ranger and, your buddy is playing as another ranger, both of you can have different war gear, different types of equipment, specialize in different fighting styles, and you can have radically different play experiences because it gives you the ability to, use that system to customize your expression, and some of them are things like, you, instead of wearing boots that you can stick, a pistol or a knife in, you wear a pair of riding boots, which gives you advantage, while you're mounted, if you want to be a character who either has a horse or kind of more likely, if you're going on missions behind enemy lines, is commandeering one from the locals.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, and all of this adds to player agency in so many ways and opens up so many doors. And the things that come to my mind are there are so many references that people can make instantaneously in movies and connect to historical things that are already out there to be able to have those references. Half of creating characters and getting involved in these things is being able to imagine who you are and what you're in. And all of this paints these beautiful pictures and helps with that creativity in amazing ways.
Mm-hmm.
One of the things that I really want to get to is you've created you have taken a cast of people and thrown them in this book in a certain light and given them a beautiful heroic image. And I love the artwork that you've used for these people. It's a wonderful thing to behold. But you've also thrown in some interesting things, and I have to ask the question, are we going to get Benjamin Franklin Banshee Slayer?
So, this started off as a joke, as an in-joke, we're writing the section on gambits, and we're trying to come up with, okay, well, you can use Nations and Cannons as it's intended kind of to play historical games, but there's no reason why you can't use it
all compatible with the swords
D&D.
and sorcery. Yep.
Yeah. And like that was just like it's there. People can do it if they so want to. And wouldn't you know it, from a lot of our playtesting, right? People really like the flintlock fantasy approach.
Mm-hmm.
And so while our historical content is always going to be history first and is going to meant to kind of ground you in that moment, one of the things that we're starting to explore more and more are things that live, that borrow from folklore and tall tales, that live in the shadows, like just what was Benjamin Franklin doing when he was in France on his diplomatic mission to supposedly have lots of fun parties and impress all the nobles so that they would send aid to the fledgling revolution. Was that what he was really doing the entire time? Or was it all a cover story for his secret illicit banshee hunting activities?
Yes.
Sure, you clean up these banshees for us. We'll aid your war effort. No problem.
Right.
Done and done.
Yeah. No, I love every moment of the thought of that.
That's going to be, I can kind of like wing and a nod and announce this, right? We have a couple stretch goals that are up there on the Kickstarter right now. That's going to be one of our next ones. So once we get to a certain tier, right, we want to make sure that we fulfill our obligations first. We get the book out. We do all due diligence on putting our historical content forward, right? That's important.
Absolutely.
But if we have, we have the larger raise, if we do well, then we have a little bit of extra room to, create a custom, like a PDF, a downloadable print and play type of adventure.
Mm-hmm.
Just start to open the door a crack into what flintlock fantasy using Nations and Cannons could look like. And, like I said before, all of our black powder rules are balanced so that you can drop them in your fantasy game and use them. They change up the dynamic of combat in kind of an interesting way because players, can bring multiple loaded, powerful single shot muskets and such to a single encounter. Mm-hmm. There's a lot of burst damage at the start of the battle. And enemies that we have, like I was kind of saying before, our enemy design isn't to have one big bullet sponge, but to really place you in asymmetric systems where you're incentivized to be that heroic fantasy of the group of, Continental raiders who surprise a British patrol of 30 guys and start to blow them away before they can really adequately respond. And all that is based and balanced around something that's compatible with a couple of tweaks with baseline 5e. And that's, one of the other things that we have on our Kickstarter is a product that we've been putting together called our Misfire deck, which comes with, lots of fun little moments where, you misfire and what happens? Well, either, in one that's not super impactful, sometimes there's just a puff of smoke and you can actually reseat the charge and refire it. Sometimes there are kind of cool narrative effects, like your bullet ricochets and then lodges itself in, the hatch or the handle of a door nearby and stops enemies from being able to break the door down, or stops you from being able to escape. And some of them are predictably catastrophic ones, like I sure hope you weren't standing next to that cannon when it explodes in a storm of shrapnel and gunpowder.
Oof, yep.
That whole system is balanced, and that comes with all of our black powder rules. So even if you not interested in history at all, even if you don't want to, explore even a hybrid approach like fantasy elements in the colonial world, you can just take that and drop it right into your existing D&D game.
Yeah, absolutely. And I'll tell you what, if I end up in another 5th edition game anytime in the near future, I'm definitely angling whatever DM for being able to play a firebrand. Guns or no, I just want to play a firebrand. I just think the concept is cool as hell. So
I like the design and setting. I like the idea of being able to play a very folktale hero who is working within the historical setting of the Revolutionary War. So this whole war is going on the outside. So there's rich histories of the people, but that's not the story we're telling. We're telling within that story.
Yeah,
and that's
absolutely.
That's kind of it opens up that level of creativity and expands on it quickly.
Yep.
I want to get to some questions before we kind of wrap things up and let you talk about the Kickstarter at the close here and where we're at. Because we did have some really wonderful questions that came through. Some of it we've answered, but this one was sent to us actually from a historian that I know personally. He was asking, how do you manage battles? Light infantry tactics is all about groups of 30 to 50 soldiers all working together for a common goal, and most adventuring parties are no more than 8, usually 3 to 8. How do you handle that discrepancy in your system?
Yeah, so it's a great question, and we play it slightly fast and loose with the history. The idea being that whatever command that you're following, whether in our adventure campaign in the book The American Crisis, you're attached to the special operations of the Continental Army. You're operating as a kind of a half platoon of light infantry, and light infantry was afforded an extraordinary amount of latitude in how they could pick their targets. Now, would they be able to go on missions up and down the course, of the Eastern Seaboard, to get to encounter all these cool and iconic moments over the course of the Revolutionary War? Probably not. That's probably a little fictitious. But the frame narrative that we're giving it is that you are kind of attached to one of the spy master rings that George Washington has formed, and that you're kind of dispatched to go shore up his defenses and achieve these special objectives that nobody else could. So it's, you are a little bit larger than life in that respect. But I think the really interesting part of this question is, the idea that you are this small group of players, but enemy light infantry troops are like groups of like 30 to 50 soldiers. That actually pans out really well, right? So if you are behind enemy lines, if you are, let's say, taking off your uniforms and blending into a loyalist occupied town, which was a capital offense, by the way, right? If you were a spy, if you were found out of uniform, to be engaging in, espionage actions against the British Empire, they would execute you for that, as famously happened to Nathan Hale. So we want to give players those moments, not just, it's a game about a war and there are battles that you fight, but the game would get pretty boring if it's just battles after battles after battles. And so we want to give you the opportunity to go in as a highly mobile irregular force, and you're going to be countered by these like groups of enemy light infantry soldiers. Those are some of the tougher enemies that you can fight. But you're never in a position where you are fighting the entire British Army by yourselves. In fact, the British Army is kind of like the unspoken behemoth, right? If you go into British occupied New York, where there's like 11,000 soldiers, and you start causing a ruckus, well, the GM is going to, want to have, and our system is going to have kind of like very, very ironclad rules here for, all right, after a little bit of time, more powerful guards show up and more, the alarm is raised, more soldiers start to converge in your position. You're never going to be able to fight off that juggernaut by yourself. So we really want to set it up so that if you go loud and you're being kind of stupid about it, and you don't manage to, exfiltrate yourselves from a dangerous predicament like that, then it's a pretty catastrophic error, because you're soon to be overwhelmed. And so you really want to be, sticking to the shadows, to running down alleyways and finding ways that you can use the fact that you are a small, highly mobile group to your advantage to confound your enemies.
Yeah, it feels like there's that weight is in there, that you are fragile, you are in a very dangerous situation, and you're very light. It's not that you're ill-equipped, it's just that you have to work within that framework or else.
Yeah, and it really highlights the importance of a lot of the stuff you talked about with the gambits earlier, about pre-preparing traps and ambushes and whatnot ahead of time all fits very much well with that sort of guerrilla fighter sort of mentality. I think is really well.
Yeah. Rook had a really direct question for you, and that was, as a teacher of game design at the college level, do you have resources or video you would recommend for people who are wanting to make their own game systems or homebrew editions?
It's a really good question, and I don't know if I have a specific answer here.
Okay,
right?
That's fair. It's kind of a big answer if it has to be one too.
Yeah, I was alluding to this before, particularly for student projects. I teach game design, the creation of video games. That's my day job, right? And that's a very different world from TTRPGs, but the skill set is highly transferable when it comes to design. And the biggest problem that happens with any type of project is that the design gets locked in the moment you start coding something. So this is slightly going to be more of a digital oriented answer, but I think the same concept is broadly applicable. There's an importance of paper prototyping, of coming up with an assertion of, what is this mechanic that I want to make? How do I want to challenge my player? How do I want to create interesting environments or obstacles or challenges or enemies for them to overcome? And you really want to use the scientific method to unpack that assertion, because you can kind of think, oh, this is fun, this will be fun, but something is not fun until you have tested it and found it to be so. Oftentimes when you're making a game, it's kind of an abstract series of rules, and fun doesn't even enter into the equation until you're several iterations down. Where you really find that sweet spot between, complexity and, giving the player meaningful choices to make, and, ways that they can interact with the environment that feel frictionless. So the beauty of things like TTRPGs is that, and taking open standards and existing systems like 5e now is, now that it has all been transferred to an open source license, but how Paizo is also doing with their Orc license. Other companies have been doing traditionally with their licenses, either in the TTRPG space or in the digital space on the modding scene. Taking it's not cliche It's not hackneyed to take something that already exists and to modify it, because if you were to build it from scratch and reinvent the wheel, that's an enormous amount of work. And oftentimes you're going to be spending more of that effort putting together the nuts and bolts and not on the creative expression of new and novel gameplay mechanics. Absolutely. That doesn't mean that you need to stick with that prototype. Most paper prototypes are discarded pretty early on, even if you're modding an existing game and using it to kind of test your concepts out. And then later on you roll into full-fledged development when you're coding something, yourself and using Unity libraries and stuff like that. It's super important that it's an organic process and you're able to find the fun before you get locked into a fixed production cycle.
I think that's great advice. I mean, I've seen it. I watched Sarah try and do it with making the Elder Scrolls game and trying to figure out how it would work, and then finally recognizing that, oh crap, I can just use an existing system. Why am I doing this to myself?
All this work is already done for myself. Why am I writing this from scratch,
Yeah, I've seen other people who've been doing the exact same thing where they're like, hey, I want to do this. And like most recently, I would say only a few years ago, I was talking with a friend who was looking at BattleTech and was like, oh, I really want to make it more role-play-like. And I'm like, there's a mech warrior stuff. Yeah, but it really doesn't have these elements. And within, I think, a year, a new book came out. It was like, oh, well, there we go.
Yeah.
Now I'm just going to ignore this half of the book that I don't want to deal with and start running.
You and I just talked about that the other day about your using Blades in the Dark, or
yes.
for us to say Forged in the Dark for your next campaign.
Yeah.
Where you were like, well, I've got all this converting to do. And I'm like, what? What are you converting? And you're like, well, the nationalities are different. That's changing the names.
Yep.
They have no mechanical difference. Okay,
yep.
Cool. So that's done for you.
Yeah.
What else?
Yeah. How do we get to the fun?
Well, what about the magic? What about the magic? What's stopping you from using the magic as written in the book? Like nothing? Okay, well, there you go. Yeah, yep. That took that off your plate, too.
It's amazing how once you get comfortable with just doing it by paper, like you said, yep. Grab a system, play with it a little bit, try it out on paper, get to the fun.
Yeah, and focus on the fun. That's such good advice, man. Yeah. I've seen so many game mechanics that you're like, I see what you're trying to do, but why?
Yep.
You have that Dr. Malcolm, moment where you're like, your scientists were so preoccupied with whether or not they could, they didn't stop to think whether they should,
Exactly.
And that line opens with, they stood on the shoulders of geniuses.
Yeah.
Right, I want to say, which is what I'm saying. It's okay. I'm giving you tacit approval to do so.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, that's coming from the collegiate level, so remember this.
All right, so we've got one last question here from the Mad Elf. Now, I think we've already asked the question necessarily as it's phrased here. How do you work a magic system designed for a fantasy setting into an extant historical setting? Now, you've got gambits. We talked in length about those. But what I think I want to interpret this question to mean instead is, how would you put magic into the Revolutionary War as an alternate universe? If we had magic in Nations and Cannons, what would it look like to you?
So the biggest thing that you want with any alternate history is to find a point of divergence that is understandable, but creates a significant enough departure that like the aesthetic is immediately different.
Yes.
Right. And for me, the one that I'm interested in the future is there are these moments in the late 18th century called the Little Ice Ages.
Okay.
Where suddenly the temperature would plunge, for certain winters would be the hardest winters on record. And in a couple of instances, this happened just overnight. Like there was no forewarning that this year would suddenly be almost apocalyptically terrible. A lot of people talk at length about Valley Forge and what a desperate time Valley Forge was. And, it was, right? There were bad conditions. And the winter was pretty bad. The worst winter by far that the Patriots faced was actually the winter of where they were encamped in Morristown, New Jersey, where I went to high school, which was almost like you had feet upon feet of snow piling up. You had like the ability of any either the British or the Patriots to wage any type of offensive operations was completely diminished. And there are times when contact was almost cut off because supply lines were just, you couldn't get through. Mm-hmm. So what if that snow just started and never stopped?
Oh.
What if whatever is influencing this little ice age is not simply a climate quirk, but it is something, it is the old magic breathing its chill back into the world. And as, you know, the continent is blanketed in ice, as the glaciers start to come back down again, you know, from Canada, as the Northeast is completely obliterated by an apocalyptic level of snowfall, as contact is completely lost with the mother country, and suddenly the British Army has to, you know, find out what to do by itself. But it's not like the Patriots are doing any better, because all of their, the vast majority of their materiel and their financial capital comes from the north. If everything shifts to the south and the Caribbean, if suddenly, specifically places where the existing power structures of, you know, plantation overseers governing large groups of enslaved people, which were completely captive by their ability to take and generate capital and sell those goods produced by human slavery to the north, if there's no market, then overnight you have the ability for people to rise up. And what would that society look like? I mean, not just the fact that the world, the landscape has changed, and the fact that you've got supernatural entities and spirits and folkloric creatures rising up out of the dark, but now there is, like, the revolution has to live up to its ideals, because suddenly you are in a demographic situation where a revolution that all men are created equal has to take place.
That's cool.
That's fantastic.
I love that.
Absolutely fantastic.
Because everybody at that point is in a level of fear, but they're all still feeding in the same direction.
I gotta say, my one problem is that as a native of Buffalo, New York, I was not impressed by feet of snow.
I'm so sorry.
Tuesday.
That's fine. That's Tuesday for me, you know. Yeah. So we'll cope.
All right. Well, I'm going to think we should call it here. Pat, where are we at, Sarah? Do you have the site up? Because I'm kind of interested now to see what we rolled up to.
Let's see here. I refresh it just a little bit. We are at, as of time of recording, 16,746 of our 25,000 goal.
God, that is fantastic.
It's cruising right along. I mean, it launched yesterday, and you're already like 70% funded, and I think it's absolutely fantastic.
I cannot wait to see you guys break through that and hit some of your stretch goals. I looked at some of the other offerings. I missed the cloth printed maps. I will have to go back and look at that. I'm gonna have to put that out to a few friends. I did see the red, white, and blue dice. I thought that was hilarious and wonderful all at the same time. You have a lot going on. I'm sure this next week is going to be pure chaos for you, but we both wish you the best and hope to hear from you at the end of all of this and get caught back up.
Absolutely.
Thank you guys so much. It's been, it's always really fun to get on and talk about these design decisions. And this is the cool deep dive in some of these little mechanical alleyways that I was not expecting to talk about. So good questions. Good props to your community there.
And Pat Mooney, Flagbearer Games, thank you so much for joining us, talking about Nations and Cannons. Kickstarter launched yesterday. You can find it online at... was it yourdadwilllovethis.com?
Yes,
that's correct.
Or on Kickstarter through the link. To wrap up, next week we've got another set of guests coming.
Yeah, we're going to be talking a little bit about reactive play versus proactive play. The sort of ebb and flow of every game session, and in fact of every campaign. Who's doing the driving of the action and whatnot. We have our special guests, Jonah and Tristan Fischel.
Yep.
And they are the authors of the Game Master's Handbook of Proactive Role-Playing.
Yes, it's due to come out later this year, but we're kind of getting a little bit of ahead with them, and we're hoping that you guys will listen in and enjoy, because the pre-discussion that we had with them was enchanting and fantastic.
Yeah, they're just fantastic individuals,
and it really does pull together a lot of the comments a lot of the constructive building that we did with our 101 series and what we're doing with our 202. So I think you'll find a lot of connection, especially if you're a new storyteller. Or even an existing one, you're going to find a lot of pieces that are going to come together for you.
So maybe if you're looking to take your game to the next level.
Perhaps. So.
Alrighty, well, thank you very much. You can find us on Twitter at @ST_Conclave, on Instagram at @ST_Conclave. Listen to us live every Wednesday night at 7 p.m. Eastern Time on mixlr.com/storyteller-conclave. And join us up on our Discord. We'd love to hear from you there. Shoot us some questions, and we'll answer them here on the air. Or just engage in discussion with the many storytellers that are up there, bounce some campaign ideas off, whatnot. We'd love to hear from you. You can find that link on our Twitter as well as our website, storytellerconclave.com.
We'd like to thank our Patreon members who support us every single month, especially our name members, Knox in the Box, Subjet, Sam, The Arcane Asylum, Sparkle Motion, Vedran, Hulavu, and Sean. We truly appreciate all your support. Our pre-show music is by Arcane Anthems. You can find them at patreon.com/arcaneanthems or on Instagram. Our intro music is Beyond the Warriors by Geefrog. You can find that at geefrog.bandcamp.com or on Google Music. And our outro music, Only Footprints in the Sand, is by Midair Machine. You can find them at freemusicarchive.org.
And a big shout out, as always, to our families, Vicky and Sean. Thank you so much for loving and supporting us. All of our friends who sat us at our tables over the years, give us these great stories to share with you. Our special guest, I was getting to it.
Okay.
Just interrupt me. Our special guest today, Pat Mooney from Flagbearer Games. Thank you so much for joining us once again. And you, every single one of our listeners. We love you so much.
Love you guys.
Good night.
Good night.